Welcome to Morning Combos with Ali Sheen.
Welcome to Morning Convos. I'm your host, Ali Sheen. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. On today's show, I will answer the question, who owns you? But first, let's get to the headline news stories. In the news, according to the fake news channel, the Crappy News Network, aka CNN, surging Senator Elizabeth Warren is challenging Joe Biden's dominance in the race for the Democratic nomination, standing at 22% to the former vice president's 20% in a new CNN Des Moines Register Mediacom poll of likely Iowa caucus goers. I doubt the validity of this poll. Bernie does well in caucus states. I seriously doubt that either Elizabeth Warren or especially Uncle Creepy Biden will beat Sanders in Iowa. This is just the establishment lowering the expectations of Joe Biden, who will soon fade from this nomination process as it becomes more and more obvious that America does not want him as we go have more and more primaries. It will either be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren that will win the Democratic nomination. And the leadership has anointed Elizabeth Warren as that one. She has shown a willingness to fall in line with the establishment when she needs to. Bernie won't, so they are going to screw him out of the nomination yet again. In another story, AOC, that damn AOC, slams her own party, saying Democrats' refusal to impeach Trump is a bigger national scandal than the president's law-breaking behavior over Ukraine. Now, first of all, President Trump's alleged call with the Ukrainian president has been described by both Trump and the Ukrainian officials as being positive and that there was no pressure made by President Trump. But the Democrats don't care about that. They also don't care that Biden used his position as vice president to force the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor investigating his son Hunter's company. And Hunter's company received billions of lucrative contracts from the government. Instead of impeaching Trump, maybe the Democrats should investigate what Joe Biden is accused of doing. But they won't, of course, because Democrats are a crime family that look out for one another. And in the last story, over the weekend, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, went to D.C. to tell lawmakers that Facebook is finally taking them seriously. After being dismissive towards the whole congressional hearings and everything, Zuckerberg is finally looking to appease lawmakers, many conservative ones who took offense to Facebook's war on conservatism. One of Facebook's biggest critics, Senator Josh Hawley, said he suggested in a private meeting with CEO Mark Zuckerberg that he sell Instagram and WhatsApp to show he is serious about data privacy. According to CNBC, Hawley introduced a bill in June that will remove the tech's legal immunity from liability for their users' content unless they agree to submit to a third-party audit assessing whether their algorithm and content processes are politically neutral, which of course they're not. Hawley said he suggested to Zuckerberg directly that he make Facebook procedures open to an independent third-party audit. Both ideas were rebuffed by Zuckerberg. And that's the top news stories for today. For me to answer the question, who owns you, we must first start from the baseline that every person owns the rights to their speech, property, and the fruits of their labor. And we, voluntarily as individuals, delegate some of these rights to the government for our mutual benefit. For example, defense, nationally with the armed forces, and locally with the police. As Thomas Paine once said, government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state an intolerable one. A limited government is necessary for a functioning society. Hopefully, we can all agree with that. Now, the Constitution protects, not gives us, our unalienable rights. And anytime the government infringes on these rights, they are acting as tyrants and not as our, and the key word there is our, representatives. They fail in being the good stewards of the rights we entrusted them with. For example, let's say a person who paid to go to cosmetology school and now wants to be a barber. That person should be able to do that unencumbered by the government, but are not. The government requires a license that could cost up to $5,000. And it's not just with that. Most every field faces overwhelming government regulations. Their interference denies our rights to our own labor. Is it fair or constitutional for the government to prevent us from making a living with the labor of our own hands? Before the advent of Uber and Lyft and services like that, it was illegal to use your own car as a taxi unless you had a taxi medallion, which in New York now costs $700,000. In Boston, it's like $300,000. And this is even with the new services like Uber and Lyft. And what about taxis that are used to subsidize other Americans? Every morning when I walk my cute little Shih Tzu Yugi, I pass this woman addicted to drugs. I feel bad for her. Is it fair for me, because I feel bad for her, to go rob someone to pay for her to get clean and a place to eat and live? Of course not, you would say. That's illegal. But the government does this already. And the Democrats want to do even more. Taxes for things like defense, sanitation, infrastructure, things like that we can all mostly agree with. But to forcefully take the fruit of our own labor, for individuals that choose not to work is theft and unconstitutional. To paraphrase Andrew Jackson, show me where in the Constitution does it say use taxpayer money for benevolence. Charity should be left to the individual, not forced by the government. What about the government dictating what you can do with your child? When it comes to education, parents are denied the right to choose what public school to send their children to. They are forced to send their children to schools that are bad. And let's be honest, the government caused the policies is what caused these schools to be bad. The government should not be able to hinder a person seeking a better education for their child. The government does this routinely. It infringes on our rights all the time. So when I ask who owns you, the answer, unfortunately, is the government. They dictate what you do with your own property, with regulations on home buying and upgrades on that home. Cars with insurance, driver license, the driver license themselves, and registration. The fruit of your labor is taken by force to subsidize the lives of those that could work like you, but choose not to. I close with two quotes by John Locke, who inspired Western thoughts on the role of the government and the individual. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has a right to but himself, and the other is, government has no other end but the preservation of property. I'm out of time for this episode of Morning Convos. I'm your host, Ali Sheen. Subscribe to this podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Radio Public, and anywhere else podcasts are found. Like my page on Facebook, Ali Sheen's Playground. Follow me on Instagram at Ali Sheen's _playground_, and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Ali Sheen's Playground. Let me know your opinion on this episode. Till next time, enjoy your day.